Salud. Oh,
Ay.
there we go.
Well, welcome back to Those Amigos.
Dos Amigos.
With Freddy Rodriguez and yours truly, Wilmer Valderrama. And in our last episode, we teased you with a very, very exciting journey.
Very exciting.
For this episode, we wanted to focus on Freddy, but not like the Freddy, the actor when he got the break. Like, I want to bring it all the way back.
Oh man.
I want to start with your grandparents.
I'm on the hot seat.
I want to start with your grandparents.
Okay.
You know, and I this is also a call to everybody out there. Like,
Yeah.
Somebody when I was writing my memoir, my book,
Yeah.
somebody said to me, go ask your parents who they were before you.
Oh, interesting.
We know so much about our parents after we had a sense of memory
Right.
that we rarely go back to ask the questions like, who were you before, mommy, you got pregnant, or dad, you knew you were going to have a son? Like, you never ask these questions because your life is what you're being introduced over and over, and you're seeing new things all the time.
Yeah.
So that exercise really changed so much for me to appreciate what my mom was, right? So I'm bringing it full circle, understanding the trajectory of who you, before you were even a possibility, like who was the Rodriguez family?
Right.
And then walk us straight into, into your adulthood. But I love to start with like, what are your grandparents' names and what did they do?
Yeah. I didn't really know my grandparents. My grandparents, both of my parents, are from San Lorenzo, Puerto Rico, which is in the middle of the island. They were farmers. And, they grew crops and malangas and verduras and tabaco and had cows and chickens and all that stuff. And then around the 50s and 60s, so my parents were both neighbors. And they had fincas over there, right, as we know it, en la loma, en el campo. And eran vecino, and that's how they met. And so on my mom's side, I had 13 uncles and aunts. On my father's side, I had 8. And surprisingly, they were the only 2 that got together for them being neighbors. And this was around a time that there was a program in place called Operation Bootstrap, where the factories were alive and kicking in Chicago, in New York, and Detroit. And this program was in place by the government to encourage Puerto Ricans to come to those cities to work the factories. Now, my parents weren't necessarily a part of that program, but it was definitely inspired by that program. And so they migrated from Puerto Rico to Chicago. And my dad came as a teenager and worked the factories in Chicago until he made enough money to go back and get my mom and marry her, and they both came to Chicago. We had an aunt and an uncle who lived in Chicago already, and they were in the Lincoln Park area in Chicago, which for those who know Chicago, Lincoln Park now is a pretty affluent and prestigious area, but back then it was predominantly Latino and Black. And for those who have seen the TV show Good Times, the Cabrini Green projects are in Lincoln Park. And so no one knows that because that area is like the Beverly Hills now. And so they migrated in the 60s and worked the factories. And I have 2 older brothers, and they were born. And my brothers are a lot older than me. They're like 8 and 7 years older than me. I was kind of the mistake that came later. And so, my parents had the American dream, although Puerto Rico is technically a part of the United States. They had the American dream like everybody, right?
But, leaving your pueblo for something different is the American dream. I mean, you could be living, you can be living in Arizona and going to Texas and making it there, and that's the American dream too. So I see why. But for us, culturally, it's a major leap, because you leave what you are to acquire a new way of life, right? Like it's an interesting departure from where you start and where you're going to end up.
To acquire a new way of life, a new urban landscape, right? Think about it, right? You've been to Puerto Rico. It's paradise where they were at. and then all of a sudden you come to the harsh winters of Chicago. To
you get seasons.
To see, yeah, to seasons. You got fall, you got winter. You got to wear a coat, right? You know, I remember I would have cousins that would come from Puerto Rico, and they'd be like, "We didn't bring a coat," like, you know. You know, to have to take the bus to like a factory job where you're working like 10 hours a day. I mean, it was rough. But
what was that like at home for a young Freddy when you were a kid, right? You had your older siblings, but you seeing your dad doing what he was doing and all that. What was it? What was your house like?
I remember one time, and you asked me about my grandparents, and I'll get back to that because it'll inform that. I remember one time I was visiting. I was in Puerto Rico. I was doing a movie there actually, and I was visiting my grandfather before he passed away, and my other grandfather was on a horse going up a mountain, and my grandfather goes, "You see that over there? That's your grandfather." He said, "That's the hardest working man in the village, and everybody knows that about him." And I remember it was with the one interaction I had my grandfather. I'm wrong, I was like 10 years old, and he took me around the village, and I saw the respect that was in place for my grandfather because everybody knew he was the hardest working guy in the entire village. And so that translated to my dad, you know, and you asked me how it was in my house in Chicago. My father was a direct reflection of his own father. Just was all about work, all about pride in your work, all about integrity in your work and who you were as a human being and your moral compass and your values as a person. And although we were money poor, we were moral rich, you know, and that was really important to him, really important to everyone in my family. And so that's the way me and my brothers grew up. And I feel that's something that I've taken with me. And as I approached our industry, whether I'm on a TV show or a movie, I bring that same hard work ethic.
I was going to say, yeah, so seeing that statement, that is the hardest working man in this village, did that mark you? And did you was like, what, you know, I should never have an excuse? So like, how did that affected you as a young man?
It all made sense. It made sense why my dad was so hard on us. It made sense why your work and the quality of your work was so important. It all just made sense because it was ingrained in him as a kid, you know, and then he ingrained that in us, me and my brothers and my cousins and my uncles. And he had a brother and a sister who lived in Chicago, and I had a bunch of cousins. And so, you know that saying, it takes a village to raise a child? It was very much a village of, like, you know, the Rodriguez household in Chicago.
How did your dad infuse that in you? Like, what were the words? What were the moments? What were the lessons? What were the things that he made you experience so you could put it together that says, yeah, that's the anthem of my life?
You know, I don't know if there was ever any, like, words, but it was expected in anything that we did. It was like, oh, you're 15, 16 now? You got to go get a job, you know? You got to contribute to the house, man. You got to contribute to paying a bill.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, it was just expected of you in everything that you did.
Yeah, you inherited, right? You inherited the house's, you know, guardian and safekeeping and thrive. You know, yeah.
When my dad would have like he'd be like, oh, I have a week off of work, vacation, right? Like the normal thing is like, I have a vacation, let's go somewhere, let's fly somewhere. I'm like, Dad, what are you doing for your vacation? He goes, I'm gonna go help your uncle paint. That was his vacation. Go to what? It'll be like, oh, your cousin needs to move. Yeah. We got to go help them move. I'm like, that's how you're spending your vacation, is helping somebody move, helping somebody paint their house. Yeah. Like they didn't know anything else but like work. That's it.
Right. What was your first job?
Oh man, my first job, I was 15 years old and I was a busboy at...
Dude, I was a busboy too.
Oh, were you really?
Yes, go ahead.
A busboy at Bennigan's. I don't know, do you remember Bennigan's?
Where?
Bennigan's was a chain restaurant. Kind of like, I don't know how you would, Chili's or whatever.
I was a Sizzler guy. And,
you worked at Sizzler?
No, but but you talk about these restaurants for me, like I was a Sizzler guy. I was a Red Lobster
same.
guy.
It was that chain.
Yeah.
Where were you a busboy at?
Well, I was a busboy at this place called Cafe Bijou in Sherman
fancy.
Oaks.
That's fancy.
Yeah,
it's still there, right?
Yes, it's still there. Yeah, and I was a busboy. I was the guy, leveling the butters and bringing the dishwash. But this is not about me. This is about Freddy
Get into the busboy conversation.
Okay, so how did you get that job?
I just applied I needed a job, and I applied for it, and it was crazy because I wasn't even old enough to work there. I had to go down.
How old were you?
I was 15.
15.
And I had to go down and get a work permit.
I was 15 too.
Was that like that here in LA? You had to get a work permit?
No,
because I wasn't old enough to work.
They hired me from the back.
Oh,
I was. I applied through the alleyway.
I see.
I went through the alleyway. I applied, and then I had a black T-shirt.
No, man, Chicago was like, you got to get a work permit because we're going to keep you here certain hours. And I remember working till I don't even know if it was legal at that time, working till 10 o'clock and having to go to school the next day. And
well, there was no hours there.
No.
And there was no such thing as minimum wage, and there was no such thing as, hours and extra hours and late hours. There was no such thing as that.
No, especially back then. But yeah, work was really important. And I had two older brothers who, how it is in Latin families, although they were my brothers, they were more like father figures,
How much older were they?
The oldest is 8, 9 years older than me. My oldest brother, William, and my middle brother, Hector, is about 6, 7 years older than me.
And what did they do?
My oldest brother is Dr. William Rodriguez, and he's the assistant dean at Loyola University right now.
Wow, cool.
Yeah. My middle brother Hector has been in the supermarket real estate business forever. So not what you expect from migrant Puerto Rican,
But
factory
all three of you
working,
guys took three very different paths and made it real life strengths, right?
Yeah, and what's really interesting about that is especially in our culture, right? I heard Benicio del Toro talking the other day, and he was like, all my brothers were lawyers and doctors, so they expected me to be a lawyer and doctor, right? My family was all like that. They were all super studious. All my cousins are all accountants, and I was the knucklehead who was I want to be an artist, But then they don't understand, when you're trying to go down that path, it just doesn't compute to them because it's very sort of one track mind, 1 + 1 = 2, and you got to follow that path.
Right. What do you have a memory of working as a busboy that you were like, yeah, I gotta figure something else out.
Figure it out. I remember as a busboy, I had started acting by then. And I remember one of the waiters.
So that's right, because you started so young.
Yeah, I started when I was 13.
Yeah, you started performing when you were 13.
Yeah, I remember one of the waiters brought a headshot to work. And he was like, I'm an actor, and I have a headshot. And I was like, whoa, he has a headshot. He's an actor.
The black and white headshot where they're just looking off.
Yeah.
The commercial headshot where you're cheesing so hard, and then the drama headshot where you're obviously going into internal turmoil in the picture.
Oh, you mean the composite shot where it's 4 different shots? It's the studios.
Did you staple your resume in the back of the?
Of course.
Yes.
I remember him coming to work and being like, he was like, I just came back from an audition.
You get auditions?
Whoa, man, he's got an audition. Yeah. No, but I started really young. I started really young in Chicago. And, I know I had said this in the previous episode, but a lot of it stemmed from, I wasn't, and I mean this literally, man, I really wasn't good at anything, We talk about my brothers, they were so studious, and my cousins, they would come from school with a straight A report card, and I was a terrible student.
Do you think it was kind of you were they're so good at that, and you kind of rebelled against wanting to be as good as them, or did you feel pressured and then therefore you kind of forfeited to something else? What was that contrast? If they were going after studies and
I truly wanted to fit in, really. I mean, in all honesty, I wanted to be a good student. I wanted to be a good mathematician or whatever it was that my family, my brain didn't work that way. And I couldn't figure out why it didn't, And so what tends to happen when you're that age and you don't relate and you don't feel like you fit in, you start to figure out other ways to fit in, you know.
Right.
And my neighborhood, you know, Chicago at certain years is the murder capital of the United States, you know. And I grew up in Bucktown on the northwest side of Chicago, which is heavy gangs, heavy drugs, heavy graffiti, a lot of graffiti crews in my neighborhood, and dance crews, and you know, and so it's very easy to see the allure of that when you have nothing else that you relate to, you know. And I certainly found myself gravitating towards that, you know. And it wasn't until this independent theater company came to my school that I auditioned to get into as a fluke when I was like 13 years old.
So before that theater group came to your school, were you part of that community? Like, were you a b-boying? Were you tagging?
Oh yeah, man, I was hard b-boy. I'll tell you. So my oldest
This
brother,
is an exclusive, by the way. I don't think anyone can realize the phrase that the great Freddy Rodriguez was actually a b-boy.
I was always a kind of a good dancer, right? And so my oldest brother, who is now Dr. Rodriguez, was a pretty popular DJ in Chicago.
What kind of parties?
Like Chicago created house music, right? So he was you know, transitioned from disco to house music. Oh, wow. So as far back as I can remember, he's like 8 years older than me, there was always turntables in the house.
Vinyls everywhere.
Vinyl everywhere.
Yeah.
Like every weekend, my brother coming home and carrying speakers inside the house, you know. And he would always recruit me to help him like carry albums and all that. Yeah. And my middle brother, you know, that's back when breakdancing was at its apex, and he was in a breakdancing crew. And so I learned how to breakdance really, really early on. So with my brother DJing and my brother breakdancing, they would sneak me into these clubs when I was like 9, 10 years old. And the guy at the front, I'll never forget, the guy at the front was like, no, man, he's like 9 years old. And my brother would be like, no, I'm going to have him behind the DJ booth. It's all good, you know. Back then when you could do that, right? And so I remember being in the back of the DJ booth and peeking out and seeing all these like teenagers dancing and all that. And then when my brother's crew was ready to battle another crew, they bring me out from like the DJ booth, and some little 9-year-old kid would be there battling some other crew, you know. Which, let me tell you something, man. Doing that at 9 years old, with like 200-300 people watching you as you're there, it does something to you.
Yeah.
Well, I feel helped me later in life as I would go into auditions like that, because I was so used to it. I was so used to like
somebody watching.
Somebody watching. I was so used to like getting ready to compete,
fighting for it.
Yeah, stepping into the ring, and I had that since I was like 9 years old. You know.
You have that when you walk into a room. I'm like, yo, man, we're not trying to fight, bro. Relax, man. We're open. Remember me? It's Wilmer, man. It's Wilmer, man. That's amazing. I didn't know that story that you were such a b-boy. I mean, I know that you have love for the for the Jays, you know.
Oh yeah.
There was a big question. Yeah. Somebody in the room out here we're talking about like, what is the story when you got your first Jordan?
Okay, I'm gonna tell you. The first time I got my first Jordans was probably like 10 years ago, and here's why. I was too poor when I was growing up. And I grew up in Chicago, in the land of Jordan, during the time that he was winning. And I was just too poor, man. I couldn't afford freaking Jordans back then, you know. And so when I got older and I started making money, I tried to get everything I couldn't get as a kid, man. You and I have had and this is a whole other episode, we've had a very extensive G.I. Joe conversation.
That's right.
And when I first started making money, I would go on eBay and buy G.I. Joes I couldn't find back then. Dude. You know, amazing. Transformers I couldn't find back then.
Yeah, that's incredible. Did you have a b-boy name?
No. They just always knew me.
What do you think it would have been if you tap back into the young Freddy Rodriguez? What do you think it would have been?
Like Little Freddy, probably, or something.
Little Freddy.
Or they used to be like, yo, Hector's
ladies and gentlemen, help me welcome.
Little Freddy. Well, they used to be like, yo, that's like Hector's, my brother Hector, that's Hector's little brother, you know, because Hector used to dance, and that's Willie's little brother, you know. I was always referred to as like my big brother's little brother.
They were already in the scene. They were known in the scene,
Yeah.
It's unbelievable. And then, you go to school, and then this theater group comes.
Yeah. So by that time, I was in the 8th grade, and I just felt really lost, you know, at that age. And, you know, the Chicago public school system at that time, unfortunately, wasn't great. And so this independent theater company came to my school and offered the arts for a semester. And, you know, at that age, at 13, you're just trying to be cool, and, you know, you don't want to, like, look dumb in front of the girls or whatever. And so they were like, we're auditioning. We want people to come down to audition. And no one wanted to stand up to audition. And my math teacher, Mrs. Algani, said, okay, whoever auditions and goes down to do it, you don't have to take the math test.
Whoa.
And then me being like the opportunist I was like, yeah, I'm going.
Yeah, I was going to fail it anyway, so let me just do it.
Yeah. And I was already kind of dancing, and I was already like, you know, so I went down and I auditioned and I got in. And the program completely transformed my life. So every Saturday we had to take the train downtown Chicago to Roosevelt University. So it was the first time I was out of my neighborhood, really. It was the first time that I was like downtown, that I had to take the train on my own. The first time I was at a university. The first time I was in some real program that was structured, that had real actors and real teachers. And so every Saturday we went and we did that. And at the end of the program, we wrote our own play. And I ended up starring in the play at 13, 14 years old. We performed it at the Blackstone Theater in Chicago.
What was the play about?
It was called City of Neighborhoods, I remember. It was just about, like, kids. Like, we were all, like, little kids, you know. I don't really recall the narrative of it, but it was, like, I just remember starring in it. And then we performed it at the Blackstone Theater in Chicago, which was kind of a big theater at the time. And I remember after that first performance, it was like I had an epiphany, man. It was clear as day to me what I was going to do for the rest of my life.
Really?
I mean, that was like God was showing me, like it was that clear to me. And so that play led me to this other independent theater company, this wonderful director named Ray Moffat. It was called Moi. I was about 14. And then it led me to a 2-year scholarship to the National College of Education theater program, which was another pivotal moment in my life because it took me out of my neighborhood and it took me to Winnetka, Illinois, which is this really rich suburb.
Wow.
And a prestigious school. It was the first time I was ever around other ethnicities. It was the first time I was around people of other economic backgrounds, kids whose parents paid a lot of money for them to go there. And here I was, this kid, Puerto Rican kid from the hood who was going there for free. And it was kids who were like, you know, that kid you see who's like 10 years old and who's playing the piano flawlessly and like.
Been playing since he was 4 years old, taking classes
Yeah,
since
exactly.
he was 5. Yeah.
And I was amongst these like, you know, really well-trained artists, you know, at 14 years old. And then the following year, it was my time to go to high school, and I auditioned and got into the only public theater program in Chicago, which was Lincoln Park High School. And I was a drama major there. I was a drama major, chorus minor, and I kind of dabbled in dance at the time. And which was a wonderful program, a 4-year program where we learned how to build sets and we performed. And I did a play. I did The Lottery. I did To Kill a Mockingbird. You know, so many plays that we got to do during that time. And so this was from like 15 to like 18. And I was doing that. I was doing independent theater. I dabbled in music. You know, I thought I could rap back then. You know, I was trying to rap.
Did you have a rap name?
Yeah, but we won't get into that.
Come on, man. This is your show.
I'm gonna tell you the story that I've never told before. So, you know, back then, you know, I was a big hip hop b-boy head, right? And back then, hip hop is not like now. Now you turn on the radio, hip hop is everywhere. Back then, you had to find it. And so there would be a lot of these underground clubs in Chicago where you would go to get hip hop, you know. And I must have been around 16, 17 years old, and I used to see Kanye West there. And so if I was 16, 17, Kanye was like 14. I used to see Common there.
Wow.
Common was like, if I was 17, Common was 19, maybe.
Wow.
And we're all kids, man. We're all kids in the underground hip hop scene in Chicago.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, it was wild, man. I remember. Kanye used to be in this group called State of Mind. It was him and these other two guys, and he started producing. And a guy from my crew was producing, and I was the only guy with a car. And so it was my job to take my guy Marco to Kanye's house, who lived all the way on the south side. And so I used to drop him off at Kanye's house on Friday and come pick him up on Sunday. And then we would have our beats, you know. And it'd be like, all right, man, we're going to go perform this. And there used to be this club called Lower Links and the Elbow Room. And so the whole concept of the club was very much like that movie that Eminem did.
8 Mile?
8 Mile. And you go, you spend all week making your beats. You sign up, give them your tape. When it's your turn, they call your name. You go up there, they play the thing, and you get up there and you perform, you know. So Kanye be doing it, I be doing it, you know.
So you went and you battled at this place?
No, we would just perform
perform
these songs, you know. And man, I'll tell this other story.
Do you have any of these songs?
I think so.
In a vault
Somewhere, baby.
You know what's gonna happen? We're gonna have to break an exclusive, you know, on those amigos. We're gonna have to hear some of these beats.
Man, I'll tell you something. You know, I've never told the story. I remember it, and God bless him and his mother. Kanye's mother had passed away. Man, I remember going to his house when I was like 16, 17 years old, and it was the first time that I had ever gone to a friend's house where their parent was genuinely interested in who I was. You know, his mother was a professor and was in education. But, you know, you go to your friend's house and you know, the parents will say hi and then you lock yourself in the bedroom with a friend and like, you know, you sit there and you mess around. But it was the first time I had went to anybody's house where his mother came down and spoke to me and like wanted to know who I was and where I was from and like where my parents were from and what kind of music and why I was interested in that music. And it had such a profound effect on me,
right?
As a parent and what
you probably felt seen too. You felt considered.
It was just a different style of parenting that I had never experienced before,
right?
And I learned that from his mother, and I took that with me when I became a parent, and I became that way with my my children's friends, and that all stemmed from her, my encounter with her.
Wow, and so then you have all these influences, the hip hop scene, the b-boy scene, Chicago, and all that. Yeah. And you start getting on stage, and you're going to these places. Well, because like you said, a lot of people invested a lot of money for their kids to follow the world of artistry. Yeah. Interesting to see where any of those classes or any of those studios went after you being in the same kind of generation of students coming up and learning and sharpening their skills, and you know eventually what it turned out for them. That to me is it's a great example of saying I am going to equip myself with the tools I need. Some of us, like for example for me, I went to a couple of classes, but I had to really self-teach myself confidence, because I never had the hours of flying. So as soon as I got thrown into it, it was really it was like learned by swimming, like throw you in the pool and I'll swim to the shore, but there's the commonality. I think the connection between our stories is that we decided to swim into the unknown. Yeah. And no one in our family has swum in that direction. Right. And to think about, from your grandparents to your parents, to the trajectory of your family heritage, coming to Chicago, embracing a new way of life, you also staying Puerto Rican while being Chicago too. It's such a great example of what I think a lot of Latinos are experiencing today. Sometimes they're being asked to be one or the other. And the truth is, like, we don't have to pick, right? Which should be, a topic later on. Like, can you be a 200%er? But I think hearing your story is such a validator that it doesn't matter where you start. Mm-hmm. It matters where you believe you can go.
Right.
Because if you believe you can go in that direction, you're going to start walking it. And eventually you find your way into an opportunity that, but look, being an artist is one of the most difficult professions.
Yeah.
It's uncertain. Mm-hmm. It's not consistent. The mirage of success, it's part of the allure.
Yeah.
But the truth is, to be a performer, you got to stay human. Mm-hmm. You're not a celebrity. You're not a famous person. You're an artist who's telling stories that are very real, like the ones that you and your family, had to experience.
Right.
Without you staying human, you can't be effective, or you can't invite people to watch your story on screen. Yeah. That's why I feel like you going into those classes where all these young people who hadn't had the opportunity to experience what you did, mm-hmm. probably was a secret weapon for you. Was the missing ingredient? Was the secret sauce for saying like, oh, this is why I'm effective on screen, because I am what I am.
Yeah.
And being on stage with that energy just made you a performer that could really bring these characters to life.
Yeah, I think it's a combination of that, and this is a lot of the advice I give to sort of the younger generation now. They always ask me like, what could I be doing? What could I be, the advice I always give them is, you got to just be doing it, right? And here's what I mean by that. The perception of doing it, especially to the younger generation, is like being on a TV show like you and I, right? And that's not always the case, mm-hmm. And when I was at that age, although it was a different time, a different era, the thing that was incredibly important to me was that I was always doing it in some capacity. Whether that was in an independent theater company, whether that was doing music, whether that was, I was a choreographer, I was a backup dancer, I was, whether it was in school, I was doing it in some capacity, because when you're doing it in some capacity, either someone's going to see you, mm-hmm. right? Or you're going to continue to, as your analogy, sharpen the skills, sharpen the blades, And so, as it equates to now in today's mm-hmm. age, right? Whether that's like making YouTube videos, whether that's in class, whether that's starting your own independent theater company where you and a bunch of actors just get together and put up scenes and run. You got to continually be tuning the instrument up, right? And I think that sometimes people get boggled down by this perception that the only way to tune the instrument is to be doing it on CBS.
Right, on that level, right.
Yeah, that whole teenage year was my teenage years were very formative for me, and all of that stuff that I was doing ultimately led me to my first agent in Chicago, which fun fact, Jeff Garland's wife was my first agent my first real agent when I was like 15, 16 years old, okay? And it was at this agency called Suzanne's A Plus in Chicago. And here's another fun fact. The only other Latin person that was at that agency was Justina Machado. Who played my wife on 6 Feet Under.
Yes.
And so I met Justina when we were kids, when we were like 17, 18 years old. And
how miraculous is that all of a sudden you end up in the same show?
Crazy,
it's like that, right? Doesn't really happen.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
And I remember going to that agency and Marla saying, "We have another Puerto Rican here."
Well, in that case, where do I sign?
You two should meet. Yeah. And so we known each other since we were like kids, because of that agency. But getting an agency, pounding the pavement, doing commercials all through my teenage years. I did a Kentucky Fried Chicken commercial. I did a lottery
And while
commercial.
you were doing these things, what was your job? What were you working on?
I was making money on entertainment.
Oh, so you were booking stuff.
Dude, I was booking stuff, man.
Okay.
There would be productions that would come through Chicago, right? Like John Wells did a TV show called Angel Street with Robin Givens and Pam Gidley. I did an episode in 1992, 93. Remember The Untouchables, the movie? So they did a TV show, The Untouchables, where William Forsythe played the De Niro character. I did an episode of that. Dude, by the time I was my senior year of high school, I was on a TV show as a regular. I did this Saturday morning, for y'all old enough to remember what Saturday morning TV shows were. I was doing a Saturday morning TV show called Energy Express on WGN in Chicago. I had a national Kentucky Fried Chicken commercial out.
Oh, dude.
Dude.
That's crazy.
I was a superstar by the time I was... And we used to call it a ghetto superstar. I was a ghetto superstar, man.
Yes.
By the time
but look,
year
to
came.
reflect to what you're saying is, you think about when this audacity started for you.
Yeah.
It started at 13.
Yeah.
By the age of 18, you were already really doing it. Right? Think about like that, how many years it really takes for you to like really feel not just the confidence, but have the hours of flying. So to your point, to your advice to young people, like you got to do it any way you can. And nowadays people have so many more ways to perform. They can shoot on full-on shorts on an iPhone.
I mean, Issa Rae, like think of how many people have done these shows on like YouTube that have spawned into like some major television show. Right. They were just doing it. You got to do it in some way. And I was just doing it. And because I was doing it in my small way, it led me to an agent. It led me to a TV show, a local TV show in Chicago, which ultimately led me to my first movie. And when I turned pro, when I was 19.
Well, our lives are. I didn't know probably a third of that story, and specifically the beginning of your story.
Yeah.
Which I don't know. I reflect on the beginning of my, the beginning of my life. Specifically.
I want to hear it.
I
want to hear it.
Yeah.
I know there's a book out. I know there's a lot of info. I know maybe you don't want to divulge as much so that people actually buy the book.
No.
But I want to hear
those Amigos deserves the
your story.
No, I thank you. I'm excited to share with you because I think you're gonna find so much commonality between the stuff that we had to endure, see, become, and evolve into, in order to have, the shot that we had. But it was nice to hear how we connected on that level because my story is quite similar, and I don't know how many people out there have the similar story. I think about who my grandparents were, who my parents were, and like what they had to do in order for me to come to America so that I can learn how to speak English. Like all these things like really fascinated me.
Well, Wilmer, thank you so much for hearing my story. Now I am interested in hearing your story. I mean, your book is wonderful, and people know a lot about you, and I don't want to divulge too much so that everyone could go and buy Wilmer Valderrama's book, but I want to hear your story, my brother, and I know that there's a lot of similarities and commonality, and I'm just so looking forward to hearing it, so maybe on the next episode.
Oh, to the next episode.
Yes, sir.